He agreed to my idea to swap partners on a double date. I had no idea he planned this. Hi, Redditors. Life comes at you fast and in ways you never expected it to come for you. I had my life ruined because I had acted on something that I thought would be harmless. Naturally, it was supposed to be a harmless act, and I had wanted to try it out because I had felt it would spice up my marriage and make my husband more protective over me. Like to value what he had, that kind of thing. Well, what I had thought would go smoothly backfired big time in my head. I wanted to do a double date because my friend from college had been pushing for it, and it was like we barely got to hang out since we got married. So I agreed and told my husband of 5 years about it, whom I had borne a child for. My husband hadn't even acted like I had told him something, and this was how it had been in our marriage ever since I gave birth to my son 3 years ago. So I had thought to spice up the double date and go with my friend's husband while my friend went with mine, and go home with our exchange partners for the night, but obviously nothing was going to happen. It was just going to be a fun night. That was what I had planned. I hadn't meant for everything to go haywire in my life from that night alone. Anyway, I told my husband about the plan and the date, and I was so shocked at how he agreed so easily. I should have known something was up with that. I should have guessed that something was about to go down. I should never have agreed to the double date. By 8 in the evening, my friend's husband came to pick me up, and we headed off to the restaurant, sealing off my fate as a very stupid woman. The new definition of stupid was me. We got to the restaurant, and my friend and my husband were already waiting. My friend hadn't had any qualms with the double date and the idea I had in mind to spice it off. She was even with me because she wanted her husband to appreciate her in a new light if he saw another man's hands all over her. The date had been calm, and I would have never expected the outcome of the experience to be totally different from the beginning. I mean, my husband had agreed to it. However, I hadn't known he had fake agreed to it. After dinner at the restaurant we had booked, we left off to go and spend some time together at a park. We had played games together, and my husband hadn't even looked the slightest bit uncomfortable or angry through the whole thing. I was even mad that he seemed more comfortable with my friend than with me. I was livid. I had done all this to get his attention, and he was smiling over my friend. Can you imagine that? Anyway, my friend hadn't known about the second phase of the date where we would spend some time with our partners at their home before going home. So I had insisted my husband drop her off at our home and that my friend's husband would take me back, and we would all reconverge at my home, and my friend's husband would take my friend home, and we would call it a night. But what they didn't know was that I wanted more time with my friend's husband. I went home with my friend's husband, and he took me to their place, and I was finally alone with the man I had been having an affair with that wasn't my husband. You all didn't expect that, did you? Well, I didn't expect my husband to find out either. But there I was with my lips on my friend's husband when my husband barged into the room and caught us, and I was shocked. Then my whole life flashed before my eyes as my husband flung me away and started beating up my friend's husband. And my friend was right behind him with her eyes open just as wide as mine were. This was not how the night was supposed to go. The next thing I heard had been sirens, and the police barged into the house, and I was expecting them to pick my husband up for starting a fight, but they walked up to me and claimed I was under arrest for forgery and theft. My husband had gotten me arrested. Lol, I'm sure you guys weren't expecting this in the slightest. And maybe I deserved it and even much more, but that's up for you to decide. I don't care much what you all on this space think. My name is CLO, short for my official name, which I can't reveal here. I'm 31 years old. I'll call my husband Leo. I think he's also 31 or 32. I don't know. Leo is not his real name either. I'm using it for clarity's sake. Now into the main event of how and why I ended up arrested. I got to know Leo when we were still in high school. He was the quiet and charming type that looked unapproachable but was very nice and friendly once you got to know him. I had just transferred to the school, and the person the principal had me meet was Leo, because of course he was a straight A student. This was how our friendship begun. I started hanging out with him. I was the one doing the whole clingy thing because I didn't know who else to talk to at school. I didn't have any friends, and I wasn't about to start making friends. So I forced myself on Leo in a platonic way, of course. He hung out with me, and that's how we spent our high school days until we graduated and moved on to college. I didn't see Leo again after our high school graduation because we left to different colleges. Fast forward 4 years later, after I had just graduated from college, I bumped into Leo again. But this time it was at a friend's party. My friend Lila, who I had been having an affair with her husband. Lila had invited me to her 22nd birthday party. I had met her in college, and she was one of my closest friends, so I had gone. I had gone for the party, and there I had seen Leo, looking fine and more mature. We laughed and talked over some drinks and exchanged contacts. Then we started seeing each other. Leo was a great person to be with, but he was always focused on his business and work, and frankly, I didn't think he would be interested in seeing me. Then one day on one of our regular dinner dates, Leo asked me to be his girlfriend. No sensible girl was going to say no to that. I said yes, and so we moved on to dating. Leo and I dated for 2 years, and I saw a future with him, actually. I loved him, and I didn't notice that him not paying attention to me was going to cause problems in our marriage. After dating for 2 years, Leo and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just my family and his family. I think this was where I started having issues with him. He never listened to me. I had told Leo that I wanted a big wedding, one I could show off to my friends and maybe socials. I hadn't been happy with how the wedding planning and the ceremony itself had turned out. He had handed everything over to his mom to plan, and I didn't like my dress and everything. But I couldn't complain because I was getting married to the man I loved. I thought to myself the wedding could have been small, but the vacation would surely be bigger. LOL, there wasn't even a vacation. 1 year into marriage, and it wasn't like what I had dreamed. Sure, he took care of me and provided for me, but I felt like this wasn't how marriage was supposed to be. Leo was always out hustling for his business and money and was always all about work. Even when he got back home, it was like his brain couldn't rest. If I was talking to him, he would zone out on me or be working on his laptop and wouldn't seem to hear what I said until I asked for the 3rd time. Talking to my husband now seemed like a hassle, and it wasn't supposed to be how a marriage worked, was it? Even when we marked our 1-year anniversary, it was like a waste of money because he had seemed aloof. I had even wondered why he had bothered to book the weekend getaway, because it had just been like as if I was there for myself. If we hadn't gone, I wouldn't have met Lila's husband and I wouldn't have gotten myself into this mess. Yes, I would have still been happily married by putting in the effort to make my marriage work and not trying to sort myself out from jail. Anyway, this was where my downfall and the web of lies had all started, my 1-year anniversary. Leo had booked a trip that he couldn't be bothered to pay attention for it, and I had been left alone to wander around the hotel my husband had booked alone. Like I mentioned earlier, this was when I had met Lila's husband, and I swear I didn't know he was married to Lila, or was even affiliated with her at the time we met. If I had known from the beginning, I wouldn't have had anything to do with him, and by the time I had found out about it, it was already too late. I was already in too deep and couldn't get out of the wand of lies that had surrounded me. I met Lila's husband, Kelvin, not real name, when I had gone down for a spa massage while my husband was busy with work when he had come for a vacation. Kelvin made me laugh throughout the whole massage session. He had also been down and wanted to get a massage done and facials too. And in my whole life, I had never met a guy that was interested about the quality of his skin. So I was enthralled. I knew getting to be friends with another man while married was a signal for trouble, so I had tried to focus on my husband through the entire staycation, but it was a futile effort. Leo was always busy, like during the dinner that he had paid for. We had been halfway through it when his phone rang and he had to excuse himself to take the call. This was how I waited and waited, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 damn hours, and Leo didn't show up again. I was pissed because what was supposed to be romantic for me was a disaster. The waiters had to come and inform me that they wanted to shut down as it was already almost 4 a.m. And you guys wouldn't believe that I had gotten back to the hotel and had found Leo on the bed sleeping like a baby. He had forgotten that he had left me back at the restaurant after the business call. I had laid into him because of that, and he had apologized, but I wanted to give you guys an example of how aloof and inattentive my husband was in our marriage before I got pregnant. Sorry for blabbing too much, LOL. I love the fact that you all are my audience. Anyway, I got close to Kelvin from the staycation, and because we had exchanged numbers to keep in touch. But trust me, I didn't have any idea in mind except friendship when we had been talking in the spa. Kelvin became my close friend, and throughout that time we had talks and grew close to each other. At this time, I still didn't know he had anything to do with Lila. In fact, I didn't know he had anything to do with Lila until I had slept with him. Yes, another plot twist, I slept with Kelvin. But I'm sure you all saw this coming. It was an honest-to-God mistake. I hadn't known how we had gotten to that level until it actually happened. We had become close, and I was spending a lot of time with him while my husband was away facing his business and not paying any mind to me. It was like Leo didn't care what I did, and I tried to get to take up interest in what he liked in his work. But he never encouraged me, so I just hung out with Kelvin instead. Kelvin, who had paid more attention to me than the man I had married. Well, long story short, I visited Kelvin one day at his home. Now that I think about it, it had been a guest house. And one thing led to another. We found ourselves unclothed and together in bed. I was appalled by what I had done, and I had stopped all my communication with Kelvin. I was so scared that my husband would find out and throw me out on my ear, so I had deleted all my chats with Kelvin and even deleted and blocked his number from calling me. I didn't want my husband to find out. I loved the man and wanted my marriage, so I couldn't let him find out that I had cheated on him. Fast forward to 2 months later, after I had blocked Kelvin, I discovered I was pregnant. And you guessed right again. It was Kelvin's child. I couldn't let my husband know that. I knew it was Kelvin's child from the depths of my heart, and if my husband found out, I was gone. So I made my husband sleep with me, and a month later I told him. I was pregnant, although I was 3 months along already. Feel free to call me all types of names in the comment, but I did what I had to do to secure a future for my son and myself. Besides, my husband was the father of my child on paper, and that was all that mattered. And you all needed to witness how much Leo began taking care of me once he found out I was pregnant. It was like I had transformed into a god before his very eyes. My whole pregnancy journey made me love my husband even more. He treated me like the golden egg, getting me whatever I wanted and treating me like I shouldn't be made to lift a finger. I thought from there my life was going to be smooth sailing, but I was so wrong. If I had been told that 3 years later that I'll be arrested and facing a lawsuit and divorce papers, I wouldn't have taken this path in my life. I would have been the perfect wife and tried to make my marriage work. I regret it surely, but what could I do? I had already entangled myself in the lies from the moment I told my husband that I was pregnant. No, from the first time that I met Kelvin. I was already in it. What do you guys think? I should have confessed from the start? Well, it was already too late for that. I met Kelvin again at my baby shower El Mao. This was when I found out that he and Lila had been dating for over 2 years. Yes, our fling was just a year, and so he was dating my friend while we had an affair. I was so shocked, and Kelvin also found out that the child was his. I never told him, but he found out just by looking at the baby. And then he asked me, and I had to confess that it was him that was the father. I hadn't known the bastard would use that information to try to blackmail, but I'm getting to that. I confronted him about dating my friend, and he had just simply shrugged. He then had the audacity to ask when I was going to give him his son, and I told him he was never going to get anywhere near my child. I think it was this statement that had triggered him. He couldn't reveal that the baby was his to everyone at the shower because that would expose his cheating ass to Lila, so he shut it, and that event passed. After I gave birth to my son, my husband's attitude switched back to normal. He loved our son, sure, but then he stopped treating me with the care and attention he had treated me with when I was pregnant. Fast forward again, 2 years later, my life was okay. I had learned to live with my husband without hassle. I had even forged a DNA test result for when he had asked me for it. Desperate time called for crazy measures, and I wanted to be prepared for any situation. There are people that have done worse than me, so don't judge me. I wanted my child to have a father, and I didn't think Kelvin was going to end up being in my life. Or I was going to end up seeing the inside walls of prison. I had never thought I was going to set the trap for my downfall. Everything I had thought was erased. I mean, I had stayed 2 years without any questions or my husband finding out. But all that was about to blow up in my face. I received a call one day that I needed to pay a sum of money to an account, or they were going to expose my secret to my husband. I hadn't known it was Kelvin at that time, and I was scared that the person was going to act on his word, so at first daylight I transferred what I had in my savings to the person's account that minute. You know, at that point when you have a secret to hide, and you can resort to anything to cover it up. That was where I was at that point, and Kelvin knew, so he had used that to his advantage. He came back again and again for more money, and I had to resort to selling off my things after I had exhausted the option of asking my parents for money. Then one day I had gathered the courage to tell the blackmailer to do his worst that I didn't have any money to give him. And then the blackmailer revealed who he was, that is Kelvin, and he was just trying to gather money to be able to start off something for himself so he could leave Lila. This was someone that they had been married for 2 years. Anyway, he went off like he wanted to leave Lila and come for custody of his son, so he was blackmailing me to give him money. And do you even want to know what was more stupid than his excuse? What was more stupid was that I fell for it. My husband had left me and focused on work once again and only cared about his son, and I seemed to remember how it was with Kelvin, and let me not lie. I had fantasized getting married to Kelvin, so I had stupidly believed him. I was a shitty person, I know, but I had nothing to depend on from my husband. No showings of feelings from him, no showcasing of his love in words, affirmations, nothing, nada. I was frustrated, and I listened to Kelvin and fell for him again, and he was telling me how he wanted us to be together. I had not been stupid about the money I had given him, of course. I had asked him about it. He had told me he would give me back in double fold when I was finally his. I fell for his sweet talks for the second time and I began to do his bidding. It was like I had been brainwashed and couldn't think for myself. It was just easy things at first. Get a valuable thing and pawn it and send the money to Kelvin. And I would do it. I would give him what he wanted, whatever it was. He flirted with me and made me laugh like before, and I was completely gone for Kelvin while I had a husband. I had even considered divorcing my husband so the web of lies would stop. But then Kelvin had advised me that if I do, I wouldn't be able to get a share of my husband's property, that I should be taking it little by little until I had gotten enough, and then I would file for divorce, and we would get married and live with our son. This may seem like a trick, but this was my life. Now that I think about it, it was like a kind of spell had covered my eyes that I was always willing to do what he wanted. Could you imagine that? I'm not narrating a fiction piece, but my real-life experience, and as I'm typing this, I can't even believe that I had fallen for that nonsense. Well, after the person that had made you do all the evil things had disappeared, and you were the one going crazy with the bail bill and community service. I guess the eye gets clear after the evil action has been done, and it's time to dance to the consequences, LOL. And I danced like a madman. Anyway, Kelvin stopped for a bit and just simply tried to build a relationship between us again, like get him and me together on the same sexual page. He was the perfect manipulator. And because of that, I started seeing my husband as someone that had never wanted to marry me in the first place. This was because Kelvin acted so perfectly with me. He said the right things and all the things I wanted to hear. I'd even confronted my husband about it once. I'd almost let it slip that I was always talking with Lila's husband. That would have raised Leo's eyebrows. It surely had to have raised Leo's eyebrows because the night I had confronted him, I was pretty emotional and raised my voice. I had asked him why he didn't like me and only showered our son with attention and affection, and why he never wanted to talk to me and saw me as a pesky little cockroach. Leo had just stared at me like I was talking through my nose, and I had told him that Lila's husband was the total opposite of him, and he had looked at me like I had just said something to put in the final clue in a puzzle. I had to cover up for myself by saying that it was what Lila had talked about when she was describing her husband, that I had used to say what I had said. The next day, Leo said he wanted to take our son to the hospital for his monthly checkup, but I was way ahead of him on it. I knew he wanted to go and do a DNA test. I just didn't know it would be what I had said that had caused him to think I had slept with my friend's husband, so I had followed behind him to the hospital, and luckily it was my friend Lila that was working on that shift. After they had been done with everything that was necessary to conduct a test, and she had sent them home to come back the next day, I had walked up to Lila 30 minutes later and told her we already had the paternity test record, and had just misplaced, so there was no need for us to do it a second time. She believed me obviously because she was my friend, and even though I was trying to hide something, she would hide it with me and not rat me out. So I gave her the document from the one I had brought to prove to her. It didn't look fake in her eye, and she had handed it back to me. I knew I could give it to my husband from this because if it could pass an eligibility check by a healthcare officer, my husband would never know it was fake. So I handed it over to my husband, and he hadn't questioned that it was fake, and I even tried to make him feel guilty for wanting to conduct a DNA check to see if our son was his. A little while later, Kelvin started up with asking for things again, and I had to resort to forging my husband's signature on his checks. This was a talent I had, copying people's handwriting and calligraphy. Yes, they were people like that. I used to sign my homework sheet with my mom's signature in middle school. At first, I had taken only little amounts from my husband's account, and I took from the one that he wouldn't notice. I had studied Leo's accounts to know which he checks frequently and which he doesn't. I told you guys I had tried to take interest in his business and the things he liked. I'm sure you must have wondered why I hadn't just asked him for money. I had thought of that, but through the time I was talking with Kelvin, my mind had no control of its own. I only did what Kelvin wanted. I didn't think that I was going to be caught. Another stupid statement to make. I had just been utterly stupid from the day I met Kelvin. I betrayed my friend, slept with her husband, and was even dreaming of having a thing for said husband. I was in a loop. Anyway, a month passed and I noticed a pattern. When I gave Kelvin what he wanted for the week, he would disappear and not talk to me. And then when he wanted me to steal another money from my husband, he would begin his sweet talking, and I fell for it every single time. It was his idea to do the double date, and I had sold it to my husband. Kelvin had told me that after the date, I should send my husband divorce papers and pack my things and my son's things, and we would disappear with him. That the double date was so he could show the world how well we looked together before we disappeared. I just realized I was a victim of, is it cyberbullying or cyber sweet talk? But I got into it myself, and I could have come out, but I hadn't come out. I had decided to be deceived by Kelvin. So long story short, we did the double date with our spouses, and the night ended with me sleeping in a jail cell after being charged for forging my husband's signature and stealing his money. Everything cleared from my eye at this moment, and I realized I was about to lose my marriage and my child and my husband, so I began to beg. Leo had followed us to the police station and had served me divorce papers and ordered me to sign it if I didn't want my sentence to be even double. I panicked and hurriedly signed and was begging him to forgive me that I didn't know what came over me. My husband had just said he would see me in court. Then he went on to ask me how stupid I was. Lol, that was a laughable moment because I couldn't exactly measure how stupid I had come to be. Leo asked if I didn't for 1 second think that I was taking money from his bank without his knowledge, and I just sat there quiet and humbled and filled with regret. Apparently, he also knew my son wasn't his. He had known from the moment he had done his own DNA test when I was still at the hospital. I was shocked senseless. He had just played that DNA test game with me so he could watch me scramble around and try to cover up my tracks. Then I went behind his back to steal money from him. I spent the night in jail, and I thought Kelvin would have been arrested too, but he had successfully managed to flee the country. He had also injured 2 police officers amongst a list of other crimes. It turned out that he was a professional scammer and had only been with Lila to scam her of her money, but she had been tight-lipped, and the process had proved difficult, so he had resorted to me, the easy target. Oh gosh, Lila. The shock on Lila's face when she had seen her husband and I together was still imprinted on my brain, and I didn't have any words for it. I hope she forgives me wherever she is. I got a lawyer after placing a phone call to my parents. I had lied to them that the lawyer was to settle my divorce issues and not defend me against charges of forgery and theft. Anyway, by the time court day came around, with the help of my lawyer, I managed to get off with a fine and community service work and no access to my child. My child was going to enter the system because his mother was a criminal, and Leo refused to claim the boy as his because he wasn't his. I was heartbroken and couldn't even begin to describe how I felt when I heard that judgment. I had to pay off a fine of $5,000, and I ran into huge debts just from paying that money alone and settling with my lawyer. My parents had said they wanted nothing to do with me again after giving me $3,000, like they were selling me off. The news had reached them about what I did, and my father had called to tell me that he never wanted to see my face again. So my son, my parents, my husband, my friend, all gone from my life over the web of lies I had gotten myself into and the person I had gotten acquainted with. I should never have agreed to that double date, but sooner or later, I would have still been in the mess I was. In fact, I should never have met Kelvin. I should have made my marriage work and stay married to Leo. I should have made him love me, but now I had no one at my back. There's nothing in this world that is worse than having no one in your circle. Update. Hi, this is 2 years later, and I am still reaping the consequences of my actions. I've read all the comments about how wicked I am to have done that to my husband and try to pass it off like I was being controlled. I've also seen the name calling. You Gouts are having a field day with my suffering, but it's calm. It could have happened to you. Anyway, immediately after rounding up community services for 2 months, I was arrested again and charged to court for forgery of hospital documents. I knew that had to be Lila's handiwork. She had brought the attention of the forged documents to the hospital's notice, and I was arrested again, and Lila had struck at the perfect time. I was still in debt and didn't have anybody on my side to help me. I was charged with 21 months imprisonment and the option to pay a fine, but I didn't have any money to get myself out of this mess, so I had to go to prison. Those had been the worst months of my life because I had seen a lot. I'd almost died, and I had the scars to prove it. Anyway, I got out a few months ago and just thought to update you guys on my life. Yes, I'm still alive and regretting every day why I had changed the course of my life. I couldn't get a job with my criminal record, and anywhere I went, it was like people knew about me or something. Like I had the words criminal pasted on my forehead. I had been job hunting for over 2 months, and I couldn't even find the basic job as a waitress. I regret ever spoiling my marriage with the idea of a double date. I had even ran into Leo. Okay, I had gone to his house and watched from the shadows. Apparently he married another woman, and the woman was Lila, and they had a child. Guess it served me right. Hi, Redditors. I have a confession to make. I cheated on my husband, and he tied up my affair and beat him up and also ruined my life while at it. Why did I cheat on my husband? It was the work of the devil. I regret doing it now because I've learned my lesson. The reason why I cheated was such a small thing, and I can't believe it either. Well, I had suspected, or I had thought rather, he cheated on me first, which I was proven wrong, and he decided to hold my leash too tight. Sure, I was married to him, but that didn't make me his dog. I was a human being, so I told him I didn't need him in my business and him watching over me. You guys, my husband found out that I was having an affair and decided to teach us both a lesson. Why did I cheat on my husband? Well, I was tired. I was tired of him telling me what to do and when to do. My husband was a control freak and a things always have to go his way kind of person. I started looking outside because I couldn't deal with that anymore. I fell out of love with my husband and I cheated on him with someone he would never have expected in a million years. His trusted advisor. I cheated on my husband with the person that he trusted the most, and he sent me the divorce papers immediately. It wasn't meant to end up like this. But my ex-husband, I'll call him Richard for the sake of secrecy, was always busy with his political meetings, so I set my eyes on the person who had always been around and asking about my well-being. His friend and legal counsel. This was the person that had advised Richard to go into politics, so while Richard was busy with his campaign, I was sneaking into his friend Paul's fake name bedroom. Paul was everything my ex-husband had stopped being. Loving, caring, loyal, and most of all attentive. Paul came to the house and I forgot all my problems. I didn't mean for it to happen. I regret losing my marriage because my husband had warned me. But when he found out, he was brutal with his revenge. We had a fight, my ex-husband and I. I had told Richard that I was done with putting up fake smiles and him telling me what to do and watching me in case I disgraced him in public and telling me how to live my life. I told him I didn't need him watching over my life because he had hired a bodyguard to stalk my whereabouts just because of his political campaign, and I didn't want that. I had already had it up to my neck with him telling me how to talk in public and act whenever we go for events. And the press had been something else. I don't know how I had managed to keep my affair a secret from them and not from Richard. After our fight, I had gone to see Paul, and like always, he made me forget that I was quarreling with my husband. Paul treated me so good I didn't know that was the last time I was going to see him. And I didn't know that 2 days later my life would change and I would regret my actions. I complained to Paul that night and he gave me some good D, and I didn't think about the consequences. 2 days later, I got back home from my nail appointment and walked into an empty bedroom. Like my bedroom was completely emptied of my clothes and personal belongings. It didn't even show any signs that it had been my bedroom before. Perplexed, I had gone down to Richard's office and found Paul tied up to one of the seats with his eyes wide and sweat pouring over his face. My husband had just sat across on his desks with his arms folded. It was like he had been waiting for me all day. There were also pictures on the desk, pictures of me and Paul in a not-so-friendly embrace. There was also one of Paul and I kissing. How had he gotten pictures of us in Paul's house? I had no idea. Or I actually had an idea. The security detail I had thought I had avoided whenever I went to see Paul. I had never actually lost him. He has still been following me and reporting back to my husband. How could I have been so stupid? I got down on my knees and began begging for forgiveness. Everything dawned in front of my eyes and how I was going to lose 10 years of my life, just because I hadn't wanted my husband controlling my life and telling me what to do. And I had fallen into the temptation of another man, and now I was going to lose my husband. My husband wasn't having any of my begging. He called his security details and they carried Paul away. I had no idea where they carried Paul away to, but my husband commanded me to sit and told me that he was going to make my life 10 times harder if I didn't sit and obey what he had to say. I sat like someone had offered me another life. Richard had told me that he was going to still be married to me till he won the election. Then he would think about what he would do to me. He seized all the cards I had access to and all the property he had gotten for me and promised to give them back if I behaved. How did this all start? I had been in a loving relationship and marriage with my husband for 10 years, and I hadn't once looked another man's way. But I got fed up and frustrated with the lifestyle my husband started living. My husband didn't do nice things for me anymore. It was only to pass judgment and tell me how to behave myself and conduct myself and the appropriate things to do and say, and I felt like I was being caged. All these started up when my husband decided he wanted to run for a Senate position. Yeah, my husband said he wants to get into a place of power. This was how everything went to shit in my marriage. I didn't know how we got here. I hated it, and it pushed me to do what I never imagined myself doing, and that was cheating on my husband. Don't come for me, guys. I regret my actions, and I don't know how else to beg my husband that I was sorry for what I did, and he should take me back. My name is Michelle. My middle name, of course, from my Meemaw. I can't afford for my husband to view this post and trace it back to me. I'm 36 years old. I'll call my husband Richard for the sake of secrecy, and he's 45 years old. I met my husband in college. He was a keynote speaker to one lecture my faculty held on a particular day, and I found him interesting and intellectual. He was smart. My ex-husband is still smart, but anyway, that was what had pulled me to him in the first place. I loved how he could say things and still not make me look stupid. After the lecture, I had summoned the courage and went to meet him, and the rest was history. We became friends, and from there started hanging out a lot. My husband and I shared the same goals. Well, not exactly the same, but something similar. He wanted a big family, and I wanted a family too. After I graduated from college, he asked me to be his girlfriend and paid for my master's degree. Yes, this was the beginning of my husband's controlling tendencies, but I had been blindly in love with him to take note of what he was doing, or what it was. He fully funded my schooling for my master's degree and told me I had to get a second degree to my name if I wanted to be relevant in the career world. I had accepted it and had done my master's, and then once I was done, Richard had popped the question. I had been ecstatic to marry him. I was in love with him back then and couldn't wait to build my life with him. Plus, Richard was a fine man, he still is, and I had thought that with him as my husband that I was going to make fine children. Richard and I got married in an elaborate and elegant event. His parents had been there to give me off. They practically knew me, and I was already like a daughter to them, and since I had no parents, they had decided to give me off. I had cried my eyes out on that day. Anyway, our wedding had been everything I had dreamed of, and I had gotten married to the best man. Life with Richard was great, and I had spent 10 years loving him faithfully and not looking the other way. I don't know what the heck entered me, but I got too paranoid with him. 3 years into our marriage, Richard said he didn't want children anymore, that it would spoil our marriage and the love we have for each other. I didn't argue about that. I just wanted to do anything that would please him. Richard said I should do this. I went and got it done. Richard told me that I needed to learn a skill and be good at it. I went ahead and did just that. That was the summary of my marriage to Richard. I lived and breathed my husband, and I didn't have any complaints about it. But everything changed once we celebrated our 10th year wedding anniversary, which was earlier last year. Richard said he wanted to begin his political career. You All My Life was about to take a slightly different turn than the norm. My husband announced this to friends and family, and most importantly, me, on the night of our wedding anniversary. He hadn't called me aside to talk to me and tell me this was how things were going to go. I was literally finding out on the night that everybody was finding out. I was pissed as hell. I should have suspected because he had come to me all of a sudden with talks of how we should get kids and how I needed to visit the hospital for checks so they would know the way forward from there. Can you guys imagine that this was the same man that had said he didn't want kids a few years into our marriage? And all of a sudden he changed his mind like a switch of the light. Richard had booked the appointment for me at the hospital and had even accompanied me. And after the test, the doctor was just rattling on and on about surrogacy and donor egg. And I didn't even know my ex-husband had been taking it seriously then. All through our time with the doctor, I had just been wondering what was wrong with Richard and if he was okay. Turns out I didn't have to guess what was wrong for long because this man announced to everyone on our wedding anniversary that he wanted to go into politics. This had been why he suddenly wanted children, or at least a child, so we could make the picture of a perfect loving family. After our wedding anniversary party, I had confronted him to ask why he hadn't told me of his plans, and Richard said he didn't see any need to tell me as I wasn't funding his career, or was of any other use to him except being the perfect loving wife for the camera. He didn't see the need to tell me because I was unimportant in the grand scheme of things. Over the coming days, Richard's days got so overly busy. I would only get to see my husband when he was rising up from bed and when he was coming in to sleep at night. Sometimes I wouldn't even see him in a day or two, and he would come back the next morning. His secretary was almost always in our house, and with her close proximity and access to my husband, I got jealous. But this wasn't what made me act out. I'm getting to that. I had just confronted my husband about how I didn't like his secretary in my house all the time, and my ex-husband stopped coming home. I had to go to his office to beg him and ask for forgiveness. But I had done that because I had loved Richard, and I still do. However, this was when the seeds of doubt that he was cheating began to plant itself in my mind. How could one spend so much time in the office and not even bother about the wife they kept at home? So I decided to test out my theory on Richard, to see if he has still cared about me. Wrong mistake. I found out he didn't. Richard didn't care about me except it was affecting his reputation somehow. I started going out more with my friends and spending days out of the house. Richard never called to check up on me. I doubt that he even knew what I was up to during this time, LOL. I had fun with my friends, and my husband didn't think to ask if I was breathing. I think this was what put in the idea to cheat on him in my head. For one thing, he wasn't asking about me, and he didn't care what I was doing with my life. Plus, I met guys and people. I experienced freedom without my husband on my neck. It was something great. I was having the time of my life without my husband caring. But then I remembered why I had gone on this spree in the first place, to see if my husband cared about me. And no, this wasn't when my affair started up. I was just a woman who loved her husband very much and wanted his attention. But he was so busy with getting his goals that he neglected his wife. And I didn't stick around in good faith, and I have to live with regret. Then the political activities began properly, and our day got filled with a whole lot of campaigning, and Richard's control tendencies hit an all-time high. I want to shock you guys. I was literally told what to wear to each event, and then told what to do, and how I was just to wave quietly by the side of Richard and smile at everything being said. At first, I was like it was going to be easy. This was what I had thought in my head. I was going to smile and wave for the camera and press, and this was important to my husband, so I was going to do it. Where it all went wrong was when it became too hectic for me to do. I was supposed to do everything by the book, not talk, just smile and wave and attend parties. But no matter what I seemed to do, there was this letdown on Richard's face, like I wasn't good enough or I wasn't smart enough or something. There was this event we attended. It was kind of a party gathering, I think for everyone to get to know each other and their families and whatnot. I attended with my husband, of course, and he warned me not to say anything. Note, he told me not to say anything. I heeded his warning when we got to the party and was simply all smiles and nods. Then I think his opponent in the party, they were contesting for the same position, walked up to us and tried to make small talk. I didn't have any problems with it until the man directed a question at me. He had asked me how I felt knowing my husband might occupy the position he was vying for. I can't mention the position, obviously, for privacy's sake. I stood there because I was trying to obey my husband's words, and the man was looking at me like I was a mute. You guys wouldn't believe my husband had the audacity to shout at me when we got home that night. He couldn't believe he had married a dull woman, and I had to fix up if I was going to be accompanying him to events for his campaign. How would you feel if you had been in my shoes? These had been all the things that built up to me starting an affair behind my husband's back. Another occurrence was when he downplayed me in front of his sister, who I was older than, and told her how if he couldn't get a child from me, he was going to get it from someone else. Now that I think about it, Richard may not have said that, and it could have been his sister just trying to taunt. Well, she was one of the reasons my marriage got ruined. His sister came to stay with us in our house during my husband's campaign period. She was the only family he had left, with his parents dying in a crash some years back. I missed them. They would have helped me beg my ex-husband to take me back. Anyway, Richard told his sister to come stay with us so we could present a united, happy family front while we were still working on having a baby. Richard didn't want to go the normal route of having a baby anymore. When I had asked him, he had said that it was time-consuming and he didn't have the time to wait around. He didn't want to adopt either, so Richard had opted for the artificial method, in vitro fertilization. I went ahead with the idea as long as it gave me the child I wanted for so long. We started the process, and I still followed my husband on his campaign activities. This was when I got to know Paul. I know, hilarious, right? I threw away the life I had with a man I had known for 10 years for a man I had just met in a few nights. Feel free to judge me. I met Paul for the first time during one of Richard's events, and we hit it off. He was easygoing and chill and didn't make me feel nervous about attending interviews and the likes. Whereas Richard, on the other hand, I had chalked it up to the stress and pressure to win on my husband, but my heart didn't want to see reason with that fact. Richard began getting a lot of backlash because we didn't have a child yet, and the papers and media channels always prodded him on that fact whenever he went on interviews. I mean, his goal was to be a good leader. What the heck did that have to do with having a child? But we had still been trying out the IVF method. I wanted to carry a baby on my own. We tried the first time, and I lost the baby by the time 2 weeks had rolled over. The press had gotten wind of this, and trust me, they had a field day with it. This made Richard even detach from me more. And then one evening when we had been having dinner, he had shut me down when I had told him I wanted to donate to a charity on his behalf. He was like I should first carry a child and stop disgracing him. I'm sure you understand now why I had to lash out and cheat on him. Well, I should have just talked it out with him and told him, but I decided to seek counsel and friend, especially when his sister had added insult to the injury and told me that if her brother, my husband, had just not married me from nowhere, he could have had a child by now. That had been very hurtful, and Paul had been right there with open arms, so I fell into it. My husband won his party's election and emerged his party's candidate for the position he wanted, and the security got tighter, but I had made it work. and my husband was paying no mind to me, or so I thought. I went to see Paul at least 2 days in a week while my husband was stuck in the office or doing some political gibbery. After the first attempt at IVF, the second attempt, the doctor advised us to go for a surrogate as my body couldn't handle the process of being with child. I had cried that day and my husband had just told me it was okay, and I had to lean on Paul for kindness. I slept with Paul after some time of him being friends with him. I should have stopped it just once and found a way to apologize to my husband, but I didn't. The activities added, and sometimes I wouldn't see my husband for 3 days at a stretch. Paul was always in the house during this time, and one thing led to another. Our relationship turned into an affair. I couldn't risk having the affair in my house, so Paul and I agreed to have it in his house. I began dodging security details and paparazzi all to see Paul, until my husband caught us and I found Paul tied up. You guys know the rest. I hope my husband forgives me because I've learned my lesson. Update. A year later. I'm back with an update. My husband won the position he was vying for. He won it by a landslide. Apparently, that was the only thing to celebrate. Richard divorced me and sent me packing without a dime to my name. I even had to move to another city because he made life difficult for me with the power he got. The surrogate gave him a child and he took full custody of the child. I couldn't even afford to attest him in court because I didn't have the money, and I knew he would dust my behind on the benches of the court, so I respected myself, but I cried. I had been crying a lot, actually, since Richard served me divorce papers. 10 years and nothing to show for it. I hadn't needed to work because he had told me not to, and now I had no work experience. I had no money. He had blocked all access to his accounts, including my savings account. It had been opened in his name. I had nothing. However, what had pained me most was the fact that I wouldn't have any right to my child. Richard knew that was one thing I had wanted since getting married, and he had denied me that, and the smile on his face when he had said that was as devilish as anything. According to him, it was appropriate revenge for almost costing him his political career. It had turned out that Paul was a scam and wanted to get insight to ruin my husband's career, and if my husband hadn't caught him, he would have released my pictures to the internet and then spoilt Richard's career. Because of my stubbornness and paranoia, I had cost myself the one thing I truly wanted and my husband.